Welcome to Financial Confidence for High-Achieving Women, the go-to podcast for women of color entrepreneurs overwhelmed by their finances and ready to transform their money mindset, take control of their money, and build sustainable wealth. I'm your host, Taryn, better known as T-Money, certified financial coach and CEO of Money Honey LLC. I believe that abundance is your birthright and that good money management doesn't mean cutting out the joy from your life. Stick around to learn how you can build intentional money habits that align with your biggest lifestyle goals. Let's get into today's episode. Hey y'all, hey. I'm your host, Taryn, better known as T-Money, and today we'll be chatting with one of my favorite people and fellow manifestors, Sam, about attachment patterns as it relates to money. Welcome, Sam.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here today.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you are here.
Yeah, long time coming.
Yes, for sure. And okay, so before we get into everything about attachment patterns around money, I want you to tell our listeners a bit about you and how you got started.
Yeah. So right now, I mean, this changes, right, all the time. Right now, I am really identifying as working as a somatic business coach. I specifically really work more in the lens of like a coach for entrepreneurs rather than like actual calling myself a business coach. But for years, I was a dating and relationship coach, and I was also an entrepreneur for 10 years before that, even, right? I owned a hair salon. And so all of these things kind of over the years really led me to doing what I do now, which is helping women, create more easeful, more sustainable, more regulated businesses. And so we do that through, learning how to regulate our nervous system around being seen, how to come into contact with a better relationship with money, and just, all of the different things that really are rooted in all of the work that I did as a relationship coach. We're just creating a more cohesive, more secure relationship with our business and with ourselves as entrepreneurs. And a lot of that is rooted in attachment theory and in the nervous system. And so that's kind of, I would say, a quick overview of what I do and how I got here.
Yeah, that was a good overview, honestly. Because sometimes I feel like I don't even know if I could make mine that quick. So, hats off to you, girl.
I can usually be a little bit more long-winded than that. So it's pretty good.
That was great. Yeah, like beautiful elevator pitch. Okay, so I'm very excited for us to get into this, and I love that you shared different aspects of your journey, and even that you are a business coach who had another business before being a business coach. But I feel like that's another podcast for another day. But I think that there's so much that we can get into. So I know you were talking a little bit about how you focused on like attachment patterns when it comes to how we relate to our businesses. And so can you tell us a little bit about that? And then we can get into the money aspect.
Yeah. So a couple years ago, I had just entered into a new relationship, essentially, right? And I had done all of this work around learning my patterns, and, I was really intentional in dating. And, so I call in this quote unquote perfect partner, right? And, about 6 months in, per usual, which was my pattern, right? Things just started to look a little rough. And I was like, okay, clearly I can see some of the same things playing out here, right? At this point, I had been a relationship coach for about 2 years now at that point. And I could really see that, where I'd done a lot of work in dating and things like that, I really needed some stronger support in actual relating. And so I joined a certification program called DARE. It's the Dynamic Attachment Repatterning Experience by Diane Poolheller. She's amazing. And it linked really hand in hand with my somatic experiencing training that I was also a part of at the time. And so long story long, I was in this program and, kind of really in this transition in my business where I was really tired of doing relationship coaching, especially since I felt like I was in the thick of it myself. And I remember sitting in this program in one of these trainings one day and being like, this whole training relates to business. Like, we're learning about attachment patterns and early development and how the way that we relate with the people in our lives, like how that's formed in those early, like really foundational years. And I started looking at the entire world from this lens. Like I started looking at this idea of we're in relationship with everything, right? I'm in relationship with this water bottle. I'm in relationship with my dogs. I'm in relationship with my business, with money, with marketing, with sales, all of these things. And I started peeling this apart and just wondering, like, why is no one speaking about this? Number one, right? But this lens of just like, oh, what if I was able to see the patterns that are playing out in the way that I'm relating with my business, right? In the way that I'm relating with marketing and sales and money and my clients and all of it, right? And so I started taking what I had learned in that training and really shifting it into working in my own business. As I started to really understand the way that I was being like activated or even dysregulated around like my own relationship with money or around being seen, being canceled in my marketing or, even conversations with about like sales conversations and things like that. I was starting to see so many of these patterns that played out. And also, as I was learning about this and really, really changing my relationship to my own attachment patterns in my relationship, business got easier. Like I actually started to see the change in the way that I could handle some of the intensity around like turning towards my relationship with money for the first time in my life. I was able to handle the intensity of people disagreeing with me on the internet when I'm marketing my business, or, just so many different things that were really, ultimately at the beginning of my business, both of my businesses really, so dysregulating for me. And ultimately through this attachment repatterning work that I had done, I was able to hold intensity better. I was able to hold my activation without running, without falling into these like more anxious patterns or more avoidant patterns or even a little bit of disorganized patterns. And I can talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like. But ultimately, this was this like eye opening thing for me where I was like, we don't have business problems, we have attachment patterns. And these business problems start to go away when we're able to turn towards these patterns in a way that's actually supportive to our nervous system and to our attachment system and able to ultimately move towards more secure relationship with our business. So yeah.
Yes. Okay. This is so good. Okay. So then I love the way that you start to describe each of those patterns and how you started to see how they came alive with even how you were handling your marketing. I think that's such a big piece of it. As especially business owners who are online. Being able to handle the trolls and whoever coming for you in and, and sometimes, like I'm just gonna say, sometimes the things that feel like the most basic of opinions that you might have, and like they be firing. It's so interesting. But like even as you were saying that, I was reflecting on my journey as somebody who's been in the online space for a while, like at least 7, 8 years, and so even in that, yeah, I remember there were the times where like somebody would say something on a post or like comment about how I look, which my post had nothing to do with that. And I would be in my feelings for like the next day. And then I was like, just forget it. Like, I'm not going to post anything for the rest of the day or I can't be on the app anymore. And so even realizing how our attachment patterns can directly relate to how we're handling those situations. And then as we start to discover more and increase our capacity in that way, how those things start to not affect us as deeply or even, at all. I think that's so interesting.
Yeah. Our attachment systems are really oriented towards us avoiding the experience of abandonment or rejection. And so it can really be heightened in business. I think, I've probably heard this before, but it's no surprise that entrepreneurship really magnifies what's happening inside of us. And so, when we are putting ourselves out there, putting our brand and our offers and just ourselves as, as humans out into our marketing and things like that, it's like when we're met with rejection, it's a strong blow to our attachment system, and which, is ultimately having us move in this unconscious way of maybe saying, this isn't safe. I can't show up in this way. I can't do this thing anymore, right? And that's how we start to abandon ourselves in this way of avoiding being abandoned, right? Or we start to reject ourselves before we can be rejected. We start just rejecting our offers. We're like, oh, this, I'm not going to show up and sell this to its full potential. And it's ultimately more from this fear of like, well, if I did show up and go full out, like, and then I was rejected, I couldn't handle that, right? And so we have to learn how to be with the intensity of what's beneath the surface here, which is this deep fear of rejection and abandonment that ultimately is what unconsciously runs most of our lives.
Yes. And as we shift that into money too, right? A lot of the work that I'm doing with clients is around that fear that we carry with different financial decisions. And so let's kind of get into these attachment patterns. So if somebody's unfamiliar with attachment patterns, how would you describe those?
Yeah. So in my training and in my line of work, you may hear different names for different patterns, things like that. There's a few different ways to describe this, but we break it into four different patterns. So there's secure attachment, which is really like anchored in trust, kind of comes from this, not perfect relationship as a child with our parents or our caregivers, right? But ultimately one that was consistent and full of care and full of love and emotional connection. And so this really sets us up to feel safe in the world, right? We're taught that, we can trust the people around us. We're taught that good things happen when we lean in, right? That, we have this experience of reciprocation or reciprocity, I guess I should say, from a really young age, that like when I put out a bid for connection to the world or to my parents or whatever, right? I'm met with love and care, and this is what teaches me how to show up in the world and relate with things in a more secure way that, like I said, is ultimately anchored in trust. Sometimes we have more avoidant patterns where we maybe experienced a childhood that was full of a lot of emotional neglect. This can happen a lot if like our parents go back to work too soon and they are really oriented towards like task driven behavior and connection with their children as opposed to like actual emotional connection. And, this ultimately sets us up as young children who are born where, and I think this is the important piece that I maybe left out. We're all born with secure attachment. We all have secure attachment that lives beneath the surface here. And then we've built these patterns of protection to kind of protect our heart, essentially, right? To protect our system. And so in avoidant patterns, we see a lot of basically how the system has learned to shut down its needs for connection. And it's a lot of, turning away from things. It's a lot of like being really task driven, but also, like this is a lot of people who like throw themselves into their work to avoid their home lives and things like that. But the way that I see attachment patterns show up with money is often like, this is I'm avoiding getting the mail and looking at my bills, I'm avoiding the credit card statements, things like that. And this is really fueled by overwhelm, right? Like a lot of just like overwhelm in the system of this is too much, essentially, right? And then we have kind of the opposite side of that, which is our more anxious patterns, right? And this is kind of rooted when we had a childhood that was more inconsistent. So this is a lot of like, we had the love and care sometimes, and then other times we didn't, right? So it's like, maybe I have this love and connection with my mom at this one point, and then 10 minutes later she's stuck in her phone with her face in her phone for a couple hours, or like I said, maybe she goes back to work too soon, and there's a lot of like misses for connection where they have it and then it's taken from them, essentially, right? And that becomes this underlying pattern that lives within us, which is I will lose everything, right? This kind of like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like I can't receive what is good because my system has learned to just say that's not safe, because when you do receive, you have things taken from you, right? So it's easier to just not see where anything good is ever happening. And it can really, it keeps us, I think, in this kind of state of anxiety, right? It keeps us in this almost like obsessive state of like really high intensity in our system of urgency and fear. maybe not fear, but I'll get to disorganized in a minute, but a lot of like urgency around, like this is the person who maybe constantly checks their bank account balance, or, they maybe, they have a hard time maybe holding on to money, right? Because they actually don't feel safe to receive it, right? They're not able to keep their money in their bank account. This was me for a really long time because, it doesn't feel safe to hold essentially, right? And so this will kind of get us in this pattern of, oh, well, I'm not able to fully somatically, like on a body level, receive. And that ultimately turns into a lot of financial turmoil, really. And then finally, we have the disorganized patterns, and these are rooted in a childhood where the parent was also the source of fear. And this is, ultimately, this looks a little different. There's no real pattern here. The pattern is extreme, and not extreme. Like the pattern is that it looks both anxious and avoidant, but to the extreme, essentially, right? And so it can kind of oscillate between the two as well. So there can be a lot of anxiety, there can be a lot of avoidance. They're ultimately really easily dysregulated because there is fear, and they're basically their stress responses and their attachment responses are very tightly interwoven because their fear system was learning to be formed at the same time their attachment system was. And so they've commingled together. And ultimately, when there's any sort of attachment miss or, anything at all, it also creates this massive fear response, which is where you have a lot of people who are, really easily dysregulated by money, right? They are just constantly oscillating between like, maybe I have it and then I don't, or, it's a lot of intensity, a lot of dysregulation. Like you can feel the intensity of it. It's just kind of like all of these patterns that have just been kind of like heightened, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that, if there's any question.
No, it's so good. And thank you for describing how we can potentially see both or see the different symptoms, if you will, in our lives and our own relationship with money, because I think that's so important and helps to connect the topics themselves to be like, oh, I see myself in this, and I see how this might be playing out, in my life. And so I feel like one question that I tend to hear about attachment is, if you are somebody who is avoidant or anxious or disorganized, is it possible to get to the place of secure attachment?
Absolutely. And I think that's what I love about attachment healing so much. When we were first writing the little thing for the podcast, you said attachment styles, and I was like, no, patterns, right? We live in a world that likes to label things, and it's a lot easier to just say like, oh, I have anxious attachment and that's it, right? Final, whatever, right? I have ADHD. I'm a manifestor. I'm a Virgo, whatever. This is just how I am, right? And we take these labels as God, essentially, right? And I think one of the most important things about attachment is that we're all born with secure attachment, right? So we were all born with attachment systems that need connection in order to survive. And, that was deeply ingrained within all of us when we came out of our mother's womb. And so ultimately the work isn't, oh, well, how do I learn to, bend myself around the fact that I have these quote unquote attachment styles, but more so, how can I learn to find safety and trust and start dismantling some of these patterns where, once I can begin to recognize, oh, this actually has less to do about what's actually happening and way more to do about the way my nervous system and my attachment system is perceiving this threat that I believe is there, we can learn how to move differently. It's ultimately that Eckhart Tolle quote, right? With awareness comes choice. If I know that this is my pattern with money or with marketing or with sales or whatever, right? Then I'm able to take a step back. I'm able to pause. I'm able to regulate myself, and I'm able to choose a new path. And ultimately choosing that new path then creates these new neural pathways that allows us to begin to make that the go-to. It becomes the more conscious choice of, orienting towards money in a more secure way. And, it's more about how do I clear through this rubble of these attachment strategies that my system has built to keep me safe, it's like, how do I just start to dismantle them? Right. And, I don't want to say it's this like quick process necessarily, but there's a huge amount of shift that can happen just in awareness of like, oh, I can see now that maybe it's not that I'm actually going to be poor or broke for the rest of my life, but maybe I'm just operating in this disorganized pattern. And if I could get myself regulated where I actually have access to the parts of my brain that, can think logically and clearly and, can make proper decisions for ourselves. And I know that when I'm in this dysregulated state around money, that nothing good happens there. Well, then I can start to prioritize my own well being so that I can actually then start orienting to my relationship with money in a new way. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think the part now, right, is okay, so maybe we've recognized, even in your descriptions, we've started to recognize which pattern may align with us most. And so and I also want to say that I agree, like a lot of the work that I do as a financial coach, a lot of the work that you are doing in somatic attachment, all of that, it does take time. And I'm going to be the like one of the main people to tell y'all that it is a process. It's not something that happens overnight. You don't just say like, okay, I recognized it, and now all of a sudden it's done and it's over, and like we do the one thing and it goes away. It's like it takes a process to get to that space. And so instead of asking you, okay, how do we solve this, right? I'm going to ask, how do we begin to start to regulate? How do we begin to start to build that security when it comes to, our patterns around money?
Yeah. It is such a process, right? Like I think about how I learned how to trust money, right? A secure attachment is essentially trust, right? It's what it is. It's trust with the world. Sometimes it's like, well, how do I learn how to trust when I ultimately was born into a household where, I have definitely like disorganized patterns. I lean more towards the anxious side of disorganized, but used to be really avoidant before that, right? There's a lot of shifts that happen, and it's interesting in the way that, this is why I tell people like you don't have an attachment style because it's so fluid, right? Your attachment to marketing could look really anxious, but where your attachment to money could be really avoidant, or vice versa, right? And so, there is no like set in stone way that we relate with things, and as the things around us change in our environment, we change too, right? And so there can be this really interesting process that happens as, maybe you lean more towards avoidant patterns where there's a lot of overwhelm in your system. There's this propensity to be maybe a little frozen or shut down or turn away from things. And as you learn how to be with the intensity of your overwhelm and you learn how to regulate through it, you actually may end up being more anxious for a while after that, right? Because then what's happening is those avoidant patterns were just covering up your the intensity of the anxiety that's beneath the surface, essentially, right? I almost look at it like a spectrum. And so you can come, you come out of those more avoidant patterns. And this is the case for me, come out of those more avoidant patterns. And then you're just coming into full contact with, holy shit, I've been so anxious all along. It's just been hiding under this freeze. Right. And so then it's like a lot of the chaos of, having to be with more of the more active stage of our nervous system, I would say. And so all of that to say, ultimately here, I think like learning the power of the pause, I think is like the number one thing that we can ultimately do, is remembering I'm in a relationship with everything. The way that I'm seeing this relationship has way more to do with the patterns of my lenses of attachment than what's actually happening. And so I need to bring myself back to a place where I can move from more regulation and more presence with myself rather than like trying to fix things while we're being dysregulated by our attachment system or our nervous system by that. And so for me, I typically, the first thing I teach my clients when they come into my world is one, I have to recognize when I'm dysregulated before anything else happens, right? And I teach that from like a window of tolerance perspective, which is ultimately, how do I know when my body is regulated and present? What lets me know when I'm calm and connected, and maybe not calm's not maybe not even the word, right? But when I'm connected, when I'm having like appropriate responses to things, when I can like sense my environment, I'm in the present moment, which is few and far between for many of us in this world at this point. So ultimately, I need to know when I'm in that state of more regulation. And ultimately, I need to know how my body lets me know that I'm not there. And so, I need to learn what the patterns and what the sensations of my body are within when they're in a state of fight, flight, and freeze so that I can recognize, oh, I'm having a stress response right now. My nervous system has kicked on and has like taken me out of my ability to think clearly. It's changed the part of my brain that I'm operating from. I'm operating more from my like survival instincts here, right? And we can start to recognize that through sensation, right? If I know what fight or flight feels like in my body, if I can check in with the intensity of, maybe my rapid heart rate or flushing of my face or narrowing of my vision. I get a lot of heat in my cheeks and things like that when I'm like a lot of like upper body like heat when I'm in those spaces. Maybe there's some anxiety, some urgency, some anger, things like that. We can start to recognize like, okay, I'm clearly not in my window of tolerance. I'm not in a regulated state right now. These sensations are letting me know that. Also with freeze too, it's kind of a little bit of the opposite there, where it's the more shutdown, the overwhelm, the kind of like almost like exhaustion, this like wet blanket of exhaustion, I always call it. There's this almost like disassociation that happens of like, I just cannot be with this. And so my body is allowing me to check out essentially, right? I would definitely recommend, I mean, for the sake of time, I'm not going to get so far into that, right? But I would definitely recommend spending some time really recognizing or really learning about your nervous system and what your body is trying to tell you in different states. And from there, when I can recognize, okay, I'm actually not in a state where my brain is functioning properly. The main goal here is how do I get myself back to that? Then I can utilize, to some degree, depending on where you're at in your journey, we ultimately want to build some somatic tools for stabilization to kind of bring us back. And, again, when I said on your journey, depending on where you're at on your journey, ideally, maybe this becomes a thing where you recognize like I might need some more support around this with some trauma resolution work and things like that. But ultimately, I teach my clients these like 4 pillars of somatic stabilization, which is essentially orienting to your space. So using your 5 senses, your eyesight, your vision, your touch, taste, smell, to bring yourself back into your room, right? Let your nervous system recognize there's no tiger here. You're not being chased, right? Like really orienting yourself back to the here and now. This is like, if you practice this multiple times a day, your anxiety will literally, like, you will be a different person. Another one is grounding. So like getting out of the intensity that's happening up in your chest and, more of that like chaotic feeling up top. And really kind of coming back into your lower body, remembering you have legs, noticing the pull of gravity, right? And kind of really touching in with all of the spots on your body where there is contact with the ground or with what's beneath you, where you're being held, right? Kind of giving up to gravity for a bit. My favorite, especially for my freezy people, is self contact. So I will like rub the top of my legs with just kind of this like mantra of I'm right here, like got this, right? We can do like butterfly hugs, squeezing your arms, just really like coming into contact with your skin and just letting your system know like I'm here, I see you, we're safe. And then finally, just your breath, right? So nothing crazy like breath work wise, but just a simple like, can I come back and notice my breath? Can I take a deep breath here? Can I allow for my exhale to be a little bit longer than my inhale, right? So I can shift more into that's one of the ways we can shift our system into more of a rest and digest state. And so when I have these tools under my belt, first phase 1, I really need to know what's happening in my body. I need to know when I'm not regulated so that I can use these tools to then come back to more of a state of regulation. At that point, we can actually start to make a choice to do something in a way that is new. And it's coming from this place of like, I'm not doing this out of survival mode anymore. I'm doing this because I'm making a conscious decision of leaning into more security and trust in myself and in this relationship that, this relationship to my business, my money, whatever, that I can hold this intensity because I know how to regulate myself.
Yeah, it's like you're able to hold it because you know how to come back to you, and it's like learning those things to help you return. Oh, this is like, these are such great awareness techniques, and then also great techniques to come, it's like to start to learn how to come back and how to start regulating, because I believe that's so important. A lot of the people that I work with too, we're getting out of survival mode. Like there's been so much that we've had to survive in multiple areas of our life, and as we get into the money space, like that tends to be, in the same way that I feel like attachment patterns relates to everything. I feel like the way you handle money relates to everything, right? And so that gets to be such a big window into like what's going on. And so as we start to build that trust and start to find those spaces to pause and to be present, to understand what is going on, that's how we start to really gain that freedom, the freedom of these things that were, a lot of them there to protect us, right? And we get to acknowledge that. But as we get to say and kind of take our power back in a way of like, thank you for protecting me. And like, I got it now. Like, this is who, I have the capacity to fully meet myself is also what I think about. And even as what you were saying, right, with the different patterns, it's like, I think about how they're almost like self-fulfilling prophecies in a way, right? So it's like, if you are avoidant, the overwhelm is what you're avoiding, but yet by avoiding it, you are creating more overwhelm. And then like even with um like with the anxious attachment, I think about how like, you think you're going to lose everything, and then but you're not holding money, and therefore it's going out the door and you are in a sense losing it. And so I think that developing the awareness of these things and starting to take those steps to build that trust. And I think even with the financial aspect, I think about like part of building the trust is being able to hold the fact that, like, yeah, you might be overwhelmed sometimes. There's going to be times when that happens. You might make an investment decision and you lose it. And that's going to happen. And knowing that happens and not letting it completely take you out, like allowing it to happen, and being able to sit with it, being able to like move forward. And I even think about like the funny thing, I feel like I did so much of this stuff without knowing exactly what I was doing, right? So because I like avoid it is like that's where I was with many things. Okay. So like whether it be romantic relationships or whether it be money, like I was in the avoidant camp. And I even think about the more that I have built that trust within myself to know that like I got me, right? The less I have avoided. Like the hard conversations, even, like, the fun part about being a manifester is we love to say these things and just like, we know that we got to say the things that we probably don't necessarily want to say, but they need to be said, right? And even learning to get more comfortable with things like that, all of it. Like as I grew through it, the first few times, right? The first time, yeah, it might have taken me out for a day, but then the next time it was a half a day. And then the next time it was a few hours. And then after that, it's an hour, right? And so like these things all they all build upon each other, especially because like one of the techniques that I work on with clients is around like part of building that trust is knowing that is like acknowledging that we have all survived so much, right? And so sometimes like the situation, even though it presents itself in a different way, you have made it through something similar. And so I love to do the collect evidence technique. So it's like, yeah, where have I overcome something like this? And what that does is it helps to build your confidence of like, yeah, I got this. Like I can do it. I can make it through this time. Yeah, more money is on the way. It's, it's coming to me quickly, right? All of those things. And so as you know that as you start to believe like, oh, this is possible and this is happening and it's coming together for me, right? It starts to allow you to trust yourself more, that no matter what you are facing, like you will be able to survive it and get through it and probably come out even, bigger and badder than than you were when you first dealt with it. And so I think that, oh, it's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that self-fulfilling prophecy is like exactly how I relate to attachment. It's like, if the anxious patterns are, the way that we abandon ourselves in this effort of being abandoned, or in this effort to avoid being abandoned. Where avoidant patterns ultimately live in this way of how we reject ourselves in this way of, or we reject our needs, even, in this way of avoiding rejection, right? And it is all a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's interesting too, in this way that, and I think kind of what you're speaking to here, like what this was kind of pinging in me was this way of like, oh, I think I've got this all figured out. And then all of a sudden, here I am right back in the same pattern again, where it's like we have to recognize that oftentimes as we continue to grow and evolve, that like the second we reach our next level of evolution, all those old patterns come back up again, right? It's like, I haven't learned how to be at this new level yet, but my system sure as hell knows how, and it's going to bring all that stuff back up again, right? I had shared with you a couple weeks ago, at the time this is being recorded, that the stock market's not doing so great right now. And I started investing in the stock market last year for the first time. And over the last couple weeks, I have felt the same way that I used to feel around having money in my bank account. And like getting below that dip of the dysregulation, right? Of like being beneath a certain number. And it's been interesting to kind of like have the same reaction, even though ultimately I have so much more financial stability than I did a year or so ago, but still have this same old pattern of like, whoops, I probably put too much money in the stock market and look what happened, right? See, I can't trust myself. See, I can't, and it's like, it's ultimately had to come back to this place of I'm fine. It's fine. And this was a really great lesson for me, number one. And number two, it's going to be fine. And I truly, I don't think trust is not something that we can cognitively like just push our way into. It comes from really recognizing those previous experiences. It comes from being able to look back and being like, every time I thought I wasn't going to make it, that I wasn't going to be able to pay my bills that month, or that I wasn't going to be able to survive or whatever, right? My business was going to fall apart. I used to tell my OBM all the time, I'm like, this is the month we just lose everything, right? I was in such a fear state around money. That shifted for me, like at one point where I was like, I couldn't make this shit up about how money, the exact amount of money that I need just comes in, right? And so it's ultimately this way of like, the more I can pay attention, and this comes along with like teaching my system how to learn how to actually receive, so that I can recognize that I am being taken care of, that I am able to receive, and I am financially supported by an entity that's bigger than me, right? And ultimately, this is going to teach my system how to trust, even in the times where it feels really dysregulating. And I'm able to lean back and be like, it's all working out. Like, I know it's all working out. Yes, I have to be an active part of that. This isn't the avoidant kind of way of like, let me put my head in the sand and just hope it all works out. It's, I'm not going to let this disrupt me so much that I go into an old pattern here, but more so that I'm able to stay present with myself, because especially for those of us who are entrepreneurs, like I don't have fucking time to be dysregulated. I do not have time for that, right? When I am dysregulated, when money is not feeling secure for me, it disrupts my entire business, right? There is, and I think a lot of people don't realize this, but like the root of how we do like trauma resolution work or really anything comes in being well resourced. Like if we don't have our financial or our foundations sturdy, especially financially, nothing else matters. Like we're building a skyscraper on a really rough foundation, right? And so I think ultimately it's like our relationship with money needs to be a huge priority of like, how do I stabilize this so that I can learn to have this reciprocity of trust with, my relationship with money, and also my relationship with the world around money. And then everything else kind of, I think, seems to be a little bit easier. I've always kind of looked at this work as like almost this like, which piece of the pie do you want to start with, right? Do you want to go into this work from relationships, with money, with business, whatever, right? It's like the entry point doesn't really matter. You're doing the same work, right? And we can see the way in which, being able to turn towards your money in a way that allows you to be with yourself more also impacts the way you're able to turn towards your relationship, with your romantic relationship more, right? If I can handle the intensity in one area, I'm going to be able to handle it in other areas. And so oftentimes I feel like it doesn't really even matter how you enter this kind of work, but it's like it's the thing that teaches you how to be conscious with yourself and not get swept away by your patterns. It affects every area of your life.
It really does. Even I think about my own journey with that too, and how like the work that I've done on money definitely improved my relationship. Like I was unable to truly like receive love, real talk. And I also was unable to receive help and money. Like all of it was all related, right? And so as I started to work on and understand like what was going on around my capacity to receive money, I was then able to increase my capacity to truly receive love and receive appreciation and be able to not only trust myself but trust others, right? Because it, had quite the upbringing myself. And so within that situation, I was not able to truly rely on the people that you are quote unquote supposed to be able to rely on more than others. And that blocked off my ability to trust for so long. And also meant I did not trust and the other part, right, about being in a financially abusive situation too, is that I was also not able to trust myself when it came to money. And so as I started to work on those things and specifically there, then it was like, oh yeah, I can accept somebody else planning a date for me. Oh yeah, like I could accept, hearing that I'm beautiful every day. Those are things that I've struggled with for such a long time. And it was all connected. It was all connected. Oh, I have loved this conversation. Like
Yeah.
every piece of it. And I just know it's going to really open doors for so many people. Real like I can feel that like in my heart space. And so unfortunately we have to start to wrap it up, guys. But before that, I do want to, of course, say some wonderfully nice things about you before we do all the wrap up. Listen, Sam is amazing. And I have been able to truly witness her journey. She has grown over the last few years. Like since we've been connected, we're connected in this coaching space. And being connected with her is probably one of the biggest blessings of that space. And seeing the way that she has not only just grown in her business, but even her ability to just share the amazing brilliance that y'all have just heard for how long, right? With the world. Like there's so much wisdom, so much love, so much care. And this person is on our podcast today. And so I just want to show my appreciation to you. If you are, looking for a business coach that's not about to force you in any sort of box, okay, but is really going to help you to build the business that is best for you, this is somebody that I highly recommend for you to work with because, like, she is absolutely amazing. So I did want to say that before we get into the close of everything.
Thank you so much. Receiving that fully. Really appreciate it. And this has actually been like a big piece of my patterns, right? Of like we were just talking about this of like, can I sit with someone having this many good things to say about me, right? Because of the way that we can hold this is the same way that we can hold money, the abundance of money. And this is how we start to like, how can I teach my system to be okay to receive, essentially, right? So thank you. I am fully receiving this. Very appreciated. And yeah, I mean, I obviously feel the same way about you as well. I feel like it's been awesome to see your growth in this and, and through your relationship to money and your relationship with your husband and just all of the different things, like how it all works together. It's been really cool to see, like I said, that entry point of like, doesn't even really matter where you do the work. So I love that, that Tara's like one of the only people I feel like I trust to send my clients to about money so that they're not getting like financial bro advice, but that they're getting, advice that's like, hey, your nervous system is more important than, this sticking to this like by the book rule book blueprint that's just like ultimately, could dysregulate you more and then cause even more friction along the way. So, working with you, even in like the small bits that I have, has had such an impact on the way that I relate with money and kind of de-shaming the like holding of debt and the, like getting things back into place after, a down season and things like that. Like, I think if I hadn't been able to lean on you in those times, I don't think I would be here talking about this. So I appreciate your part in my journey as well.
Oh, thank you. I receive, I receive, I receive. Oh, so much love on this episode. It's so great. Thank you so much, Sam. I appreciate all of those words. And yeah, and just the impact, of course, matters so much to me because that's why I do this work. So I'm so happy to hear that and seeing you thrive, girl, with these investments is like it's just so great. I love it. Okay, so now before we get to the final part, we have an amazing announcement to make. And so um if you enjoyed this episode for real and you are looking to do this work specifically around, like maybe money is going to be your entry point when it comes to this, right? And so if you are looking to do that, Sam and I are actually hosting a retreat together this year. Oh my gosh. And it's called Rich and Regulated, like, period. The title is everything. But the retreat is going to be such an in depth experience about these things that we have talked about today. And of course, it's also going to be fun. It's also going to be, rejuvenating in many ways. But Sam, where are we going? I think we need to let the people know where we're going and let me know what you want to say about what this retreat is going to be.
Yeah, I think it's the rich and regulated retreat, right? Like it's like both of our worlds colliding, even though both of our worlds aren't that different anyway, right? So we are colliding our worlds in my favorite country ever. We're going to Italy. We are going to Italy. And we this retreat has been a work in progress for a long time. We've been talking about it. We've kind of planned different iterations of it. And just with the way that life has gone, it's been interesting in the way that like there was something about like the first version of this that we were talking about putting together that just like there was like a lot of resistance in my system around it for some reason. Like it was like timing, location, there were just so many things. And then ultimately we kind of, I think what I feel like I do best as a manifester, you may relate to this as well, is like, all right, let's take it all off the table, see what we actually want to do here. And so
Yes.
ultimately we found, I think, a time and a space that feels really aligned for us in Italy. It's like we were looking at retreat houses and things like that the other day, and I was like, oh my God, I didn't even look at any of the other ones you had sent, right? Because I was like, this is it. This is the spot. Like, and I think, for those of you who are manifestors, when you know, you know. And so a lot of what we talked about here as far as like the stabilization tools and, starting to create this awareness of our patterns, like all of this is great. And there is much deeper work here to do. And I think ultimately it's highly individualized work. Each of our nervous systems has a very unique fingerprint of how we relate with money and anything that is ultimately, based around like stability and security and especially financial security, right? And so, whether, I kind of already spoke to this, but the way that you manage $100 is often the same way that you'll manage $1 million, right? And so I think there's a lot of women out there, I can speak for myself over the previous years, where some of my most dysregulating years with money were actually when I was making the most money ever. And so I think that there are a lot of women out here in this world who have learned how to make money and learned how to be successful, but they haven't learned how to create a regulated relationship with money that really allows them to experience expansion in wealth and true like impact in having a larger income and things like that. And so ultimately, like obviously we're lots of fun. We're going to be doing lots of fun things. We're going to be in freaking Italy, like hello. And also having this ability to have this really intimate space where we can work through some of the trauma resolution around money and really actually integrate this work into your nervous system in a way that is supportive for you long term and not just like us throwing a bunch of like spreadsheets at you and like financial bro nonsense. Like we're going to really work at a deep level here. And I feel like, I mean, this is literally the retreat that I needed a couple years ago. Like, and so that's how I move in my world. I feel like I'm always working with the past version of me that needed this. Like, where are these people, right? And so I feel like you and I are really bringing this to the world, like that is so freaking needed right now. Like, we need to be well resourced and we need to be rich and regulated.
Yes. I mean, it's so much the same. Like I feel like also most to everything that I create are things that I've wanted around, like along my journey. And yes, this is definitely going to be, a space for you to grow and elevate in your handling of money, because yes, like that happens so often where it's when you are making the most you've ever made, that's where you can start to make, some of the decisions that you end up regretting the most, right? And the ones that we end up having to do the work on after the fact. And so if you can go into or even be in that space, like sustaining the wealth that you have, it's not just about how much money you make and how much money you are bringing in. It's about how much you're able to continue to keep after that. And so, like being able to, yeah, just go through those things, go through like the workshops that we have planned are so exciting. And they're exciting because, like, look, I get excited about growth. Okay. Yes, the work is hard. Sometimes I just want to like cry. However, it's always been worth it. And so I get really excited to be able to facilitate that process for another woman on her journey. And so I'm excited for us to, go through some of the strategies. I think one of the coolest things that we're doing in this retreat is that you also get individual time with both of us to go and have something personalized to you. So it's not just going to be group everything. It's, as we're starting to go through the different workshops and do this work around money, what are some things that, what are some moves that you can start to make in terms of your finances that are going to align with the things that you have learned and experienced in this retreat. And so I'm just very excited about this experience. And so we will include the link to that in the show notes. And then, of course, you can connect with both of us individually. If you'd like to just talk more about the experience, we would be happy to do that. This is, as Sam said, an intimate space. So this is going to be something it's not about to be 20 people. Okay. It's not about to be 2011 people all over Italy in this retreat. It's definitely going to be, no more than like 9 folks is what we really have in mind. We want to be able to, serve to the best of our ability. And we can do that with that intimate group of people who are going to be so blessed to go through this experience. Okay. So Sam, how can everyone stay connected with you after they listen to this amazing episode?
Thank you. So I am on Instagram and Threads as Somatically Sam. So SOMATICALLYSAM. And yeah, that's probably where I'm most active. So I would say find me there, and I would love to connect with all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, Sam. I appreciate you yet again. And everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Financial Confidence for High Achieving Women podcast. I will catch you next time on the next episode. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Financial Confidence for High Achieving Women podcast. I hope the insights shared in this episode have inspired you to take one small action step toward a more empowered relationship with money. If you're ready to take control of your finances like the rich bitch you are, I invite you to book a 90-minute Organize Your Money Honey intensive with me. You'll walk away with a crystal clear financial plan, a budget you'll actually stick to, and actionable steps to start saving and investing faster. Head to the link in the show notes to book your spot. I'm so grateful to be part of your financial journey, and I can't wait to see all the incredible moves you'll make. Thank you for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.